find more space to talk more about the offering. Okay, so these sacrificial systems are what God put in place for worship. Okay? And so the sacrificial system was focused on sin. So when we worship God, what gets in the way between us and Him? Sin. Sin is like a barrier that sits between us and God. And He really, we're trying to see Him, and He's trying to see us, but this big old sin is in the way. And while we're doing the best to worship Him, and sometimes we mess up so bad, and then we walk in like we didn't do nothing at all. Hi, God, how you doing? And He's looking at us like, you got to be kidding. You got to first handle your business, because you know you messed up. Before you walked in this church, you cursed out a person for taking your parking space, and now you're going to walk up in here like you the best saint in the world. You got to get it together. Leave it alone. You got to come in correct. First thing you need to go is go get it right with your sister or your brother that you cursed out in the parking lot. Then you can come and offer your worship. So sin will get in the way of worship. And God really can't see you because this got to get out of the way. And the only way this can get out of the way is, I'm sorry. Yes, God, I messed up and I won't do it anymore. Or I am going to go to my brother or my sister and get it right. And then this gets pushed out of the way. Now God can see you. That's the right spot right there for you to go ahead and say, hey, man, I see you, Bridget. Hey, girl. Hey, girl. She done jumped on there and say, hey, man. I see you. All right, so when we got to get the junk out of the way so that we can worship. If we don't get the junk out of the way, I promise you, we won't be able to offer God any worship. So now we're going to the worship leader, and you'll see in chapters 8 and 9, God has a worship leader called the priest. The priesthood comes out of the tribe of Levi, which is one of the 12 sons of, okay, Robert, I see you finally responded. All right, hallelujah. Wake up, Robert. All right, so the high priest is the worship leader, okay? And he's going to show us how to worship. So guess what? He's got to learn it before he can teach it. Right? So we're going back to that time when you went to your first school dance. And you had to sit and watch. You held up the wall and you watched people do their moves. And then you did your little practice. And then you were able to get out there and show that you knew how to do that dance as well. Okay? So the priesthood is training the priests from early in their life. All these young boys are being trained how to worship because any one of them might be called upon to be the high priest. So they've got to be observing what the priest does, right? They got to observe how the priest acts. They got to observe how the priest talks. They got to observe how the priest dresses. Now, you know in our discussion earlier that the high priest had a complete outfit on, and his breastplate had 12 precious stones on it. They were all different because they all represented each tribe of Israel. And they had different colors, and on each stone was engraved the name of each tribe. Because God is interested in everybody. That's your chance to say, hallelujah, he's interested in me. So because God is interested in each of us, he wants to reach us, and he reaches us through his priest, right? Now, the high priest would be on par with the senior pastor or the pastor of the church. I know there are some churches that call several people pastors, and then there's a senior pastor who is the chief pastor of the church, right? I'm not talking about the ones that are underneath. I'm talking about the one at the top of the food chain. Whoever that is, and in this stage, now I know we're in a different age where you have co-pastors, but in this lesson, there are, if you look in Leviticus 8 and 9, there ain't no co-pastors there. It's just pastor, right? Or high priest. So there wouldn't be a co-high priest. All right, so this person would have been responsible for leading worship and showing you how to get off that wall and to get into worship. Okay? Now, when you look at the prophet, P-R-O-F-I-T, I promise you, and it comes up later in here, but I'm going to take a little bit of thunder away from our next lesson, which will probably be next week. If you needed a blessing, now we know that leprosy comes to the family of Israel because they're moving into houses that have problems, and they're picking up leprosy and they can't figure out why. One of the prophets, or maybe I'll say benefits, of worshiping God is healing comes into play. Deliverance, a financial breakthrough, or a breakthrough. It could be any type of breakthrough. Cleansing, which is what leprosy would be. You would be cleansed from leprosy. You could be cleansed from sickle cell. You could be cleansed from AIDS. You can't be healed from it, but you can be cleansed from it. And the healing comes as on the backside of once you are cleansed, then you are now healed. But for someone to say, I'm going to be healed from leprosy, that's kind of backwards because leprosy can only be cleansed. And when it's cleansed, then you are declared healed, okay, or declared whole. The word healed in Greek means to be made whole. And we use the word healed because sickness, you get healed from sicknesses, you get delivered from what binds you, which would be being demonized as being bound. So you get delivered from being demonized or bound. You don't get delivered from cancer. You get healed from cancer, right? Or cleansed from cancer, depending on the type it is. But the benefit or the profit is that if you refuse to give God worship, don't ask him for a miracle. Now I'm going to let that set in. I'm going to leave the lights on so y'all can see. Look in the mirror. If you need a miracle from God, you ought to be worshiping him because that's the profit. That's the benefit of worship. Now we're going to spend more time on that, obviously, because later on you'll see how this really plays out by way of leprosy. But a worshiping congregation is a blessed congregation, is a congregation that you have more well people or more whole people than you have unwell or unwhole. Okay? Now we're in a season where there are people that are not in church, and many of them are using the excuse of the coronavirus why they don't go. But the truth be told, some of them haven't been in church long before the virus hit, and they're using it as an excuse. And so this is not just in L.A. There he is, Robert. Yeah, yes, Lord. Yeah, I know I'm right. I've talked to pastors across the nation. I've talked to people in Memphis. I've talked to them in Philly. I've talked to them in Florida. I've talked to them in Alabama. I don't need to go any deeper because I don't want anyone wondering, well, where hasn't he been? But the point I'm trying to make is this is happening all over the nation where there is a falling away, where people stop attending church, and churches that used to have 4 services because you couldn't get the people in have now condensed to 2 or 1 service per Sunday because of this falling away. And this falling away includes the 18 to 55-year-olds. There it is. There it is. That's that group. From 18 to 55. These are the ones who say in effect or direct, I don't need God like y'all need him.
Come on, preacher.
I don't need God to as my crutch. I can do things on my own. And those of you that need to run the church all the time, you guys are weak. Here's the point I'm trying to get across. While I know that each of us can worship God privately, because church is also our temple, our house, our body, right? We are the temple of God. But there's something about corporate worship that is different than personal worship. And let me see if I can explain it based on who I see that's checked in. Okay, when I come to worship, what Rhonda brings to worship is different than what Ernestine brings to worship. And what Ernestine brings to worship is different from what Robert Stevenson brings to worship, which is different from what Bridget brings to worship, which is different from what Sherilyn brings to worship. And if each of us participates in worship, we all get a nice big bouquet of flowers to present to God.
Yeah.
But if the youth say, I don't need God, so there's no youthful worship happening. Right. If the young adults say, I don't need God, right? So there's no young adult worship, with the energy. If those that are aiming towards retirement say, I'll come back to God when I retire, right? So there's not that adult type of worship. Then all we giving God is 2 or 3 flowers. When we should be giving him a bouquet. So what ought to happen is, rather than us worrying about the knuckleheads that stop coming to church. Now, here's what some of these pastors have said. Because of this virus, some are going to come running back to church because they were told not to come, and because they realize that it's important to come to church, come to worship. And I say, okay, I can see how that happens. And then there are others who, because they survived this virus and didn't come to church before the virus, they're going to stay gone, right? And so, you got those 2 groups. And I'm just sharing what me and many preachers that I've talked to across the nation realize, because what's happening in a local church here in LA is also happening in other states. In fact, there's some happening outside of this country, right? Where it's a similar thing. There's a falling away. And Jesus did acknowledge that there would be a falling away. They call it apostasy, where you fall away from the faith, fall away from the practice, fall away from participating in the worship experience. And here's the thing that really becomes the most obvious. If the bouquet is not full, right? So, for instance, if there's no young adult giving God praise, and a young adult visitor comes in, then they won't see an example of a young adult praising because they're not there, right? Or an adult praising, or a youth praising, right? They won't see that. So, if you go to going back to that example, you go to the dance and you don't see nobody dancing, you'll never learn how to dance. All you got is the DJ and nobody else. But you won't be back. Because why go to a dance when ain't nobody in there dancing? Right? So you say, well, that place was bunk. I ain't going back there. And you might attempt to go to 2 or 3 other dances before you give up altogether, because you go there to expend energy, right? And here's what happens in both dancing back in the day, for those who were doing that, and fully engaged worship. There's going to be some activity of your limbs. You're going to get your cardio up. You're probably going to sweat. Those are 3 things I can say without fear of contradiction that's going to happen when you get fully engaged in worship, okay? And if you don't ever get that, then you will never learn how to dance, or you will never learn how to worship, right? The only thing you'll do is you will, when worship comes up, more than likely you'll try to mimic what you've heard, but you won't know appropriate worship because Jesus referred to it as in spirit and in truth. And we're going to hammer that home on this in this lesson, hopefully by next week. So the high priest is the worship leader who is the example, shows everyone how worship happens, how worship is supposed to go, what worship looks like. And because the high priest is putting in some flavor on the burnt offering, some frankincense, some smell good, what happens is when that fire goes up, you can smell worship. That's why worship has an aroma. You can smell it. God can smell it when it reaches the heavens. Now, most of us know the difference between a clean place, because you come in and you smell the fragrance of the cleaners, right? You smell, I'm not going to call the name because ain't nobody paid nothing for me to call your name. But there are several products out there, when you've used them as furniture polish or as something you're mopping the floors with, you can smell it, right? You know, they wipe off the tables or whatever. They got this stuff that you spray on mirrors and glass and windows. I almost said it. You spray it on windows, and you get a different look through the glass or at the mirror. And it looks clean, and you can smell the cleanliness, right? Now, if a rag has been rinsed out but not properly, not completely, and you still clean, and you walk in, you see a clean room, but you have an odor, or it smells somewhat musty, but you look at it, and from face value, it looks clean, but something, you realize that something is off because you can smell it, right? So when we try to offer God, here it comes, y'all, worship, after we done all our dirt, it stinks. And imagine God doing this. Oh, no.
Come on.
Oh, no. I can't take that. Because we done this. We done came to church. We trying to, hey, Lord, how you doing? And this sin is all in the way. And we trying to praise, yeah. That's why I give you my total praise. And he's doing this. That stinks. He wants us to utilize our worship and get the junk out of the way. So God has set in motion a plan for us. And in Leviticus, it's all about worship.
All about worship.
And so my hope and prayer is that by the time you have finished this lesson with us, you will understand the importance of a worship experience that is full and fruitful. And so it is my hope and prayer that you enjoyed this lesson. If you want to donate, just go to our website and put in whatever you feel so led to give. Our hope and prayer is that the Lord continues to protect you and keep you and to provide for you. Our hope is that if you're traveling, that God gets you to your destination safely and unharmed. Our prayer is that whatever you have need of, that God provides it. And our prayer is that you will become a worshiper and you will worship God the way He wants to be worshiped. He wants us to be full and unabated and unashamed. And our hope and our prayer is that we will see you again on next week. So this is Pastor Virgil Jones signing off at Calvary Baptist Church. See you next time. God bless you, and we love you.